This is problem 6 from the H8-6 homework. It asks us to find all zeros using the quadratic formula. So letter A, we have y is equal to 2x squared plus 6x plus 10. Now first thing here, right, if we're trying to solve it here, we're going to put in 0 for our y because we're trying to figure out where this graph crosses the x-axis. Now, first thing I see here, we can make this a little bit easier on ourselves because when you look at the values that we have in the problem, right, they're all even here, which means there is a common factor that we could take out. We could actually factor out a 2, and we now have x squared plus 3x plus 5 here is equal to 0, right? And you thought about, like, if you divided both sides by 2, right, we have a different parabola here. But this parabola that's left over has the same x-intercepts as the one that we started with. And that's all we're focused on. We're not worried about any other points here, just the x-intercepts. So if you want to make the numbers a little bit smaller and easier to work with, I would advise that you do that. Okay, so remember our quadratic formula, that this x is going to equal the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over the product of 2 times a. Okay, so in this case here, we've got a is equal to 1, b is equal to 3, and c is equal to 5. So we'll just take it and plug it in here. We've got x is going to equal the opposite of 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, and then we're going to put this whole thing over 2 times 1. All right, so we're just going to simplify this here. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, we've got a 9 minus 20, which is going to give us a negative 11. Made my radical a little too long there, don't need that. All right, and then on the bottom, we have 2 times 1 is just 2. And now we just need to look to simplify our square root. The square root of negative 11, right? Well, that's like saying the square root of 11 times a negative 1. So the square root of 11 isn't going to break down, but the square root of negative 1 we know is I, right? So we have radical 11 times I, or I like to write that as I radical 11. So I have a negative 3 plus or minus I radical 11 over 2. And since 2 doesn't have any common factors besides the value of 1 with negative 3 and I, you could probably just leave it in this form and that would be just fine there. Now, if it asked you to write it in the form of a plus bi, sometimes it asks you to do that, then we'd have to split it and break it and give each of them their own denominator. I'm talking about negative 3, right? And our I would each have to have the same denominator. I don't know why I wrote that negative 3 in blue. Just bear with me there. So this would be like saying negative 3 over 2 plus or minus, radical 11 over 2i if they asked you to write it in this form, okay? So this one didn't, but there will be some that might ask you to do that here in some of the upcoming assignments. So that hopefully will put you a little bit ahead of the game. All right, let's go ahead here and do the second problem there. Now you'll see on this one we have 2x squared minus 20x plus 53. So after we take it and we put in our 0, okay, it doesn't look like we have the ability to factor out anything to make our numbers smaller in this one. So we'll just go ahead here and say that a should equal 2, b should equal negative 20, and c should equal 53. So we'll set it up using our formula. X is equal to the opposite of negative 20. We have plus or minus the square root of a negative 20 squared minus 4 times 2 times 53. Yikes. Now that's all going to be over 2 times 2. All right, well, just take your time here and simplify. We've got the opposite of negative 20 would be 20. plus or minus. And then inside our square root, if you need to take this in a couple steps, go for it. Negative 20 squared we know is 400. And then we only have one negative over here, so we're going to do 400 minus. And then I've got 8 times a 53. Well, 8 times 50 is, 400? And then 8 times 3 is 24, so it'd be minus 424 all over 4 right now. So let's just simplify. So we got x is equal to, plus or minus, we have the square root of negative 24 over 4. All right, so with this one, we know the square root of negative 24. I'll do this in a different color so it stands out, right? Remember, the square root of negative 24 is going to equal 4 times 6 times a negative 1, which then gives us a 2i radical 6 left over. So we have 20 plus or minus 2i radical 6 all over 4. And for this one here, you can see that it looks like it should reduce down. Let's just go ahead and break it apart and do the a plus bi thing here. Okay, so if we're going to write it in that form, I need to give each of them their own denominator. So 20 over 4 plus or minus 2i radical 6 over 4. Now 20 over 4 is the same thing as 5. And then plus or minus. And we can't cancel out anything that pertains with the 6, right? The 6 is inside the radical, and we don't have anything else inside a radical. But I know 2 goes into 2 once, and it goes into 4 2 times. So if I was going to write this here in this form, I would say this is going to be radical 6 over 2, and then I is kind of afterward there, if it's in that a plus bi form. I always try to put the I in the back when we write it in that form. All right, so another possible answer, just in case anybody was trying to, if you wrote down your answer as 10 plus or minus I radical 6 over 2, I would accept that answer as well. Okay, that's not on the answer sheet, but I just want to throw that out there. So if you got that answer, I'd be cool with that too. All right, this is problem number 6 from H8-6. And if you have questions, please make sure you reach out. Thanks for watching.